Ladies and gentlemen, greetings from me and my wonderful friend Kola, with whom we accumulated a wealth of experiences using Soviet photographic equipment in general and lenses in particular. We've decided to create a tier list of 21 Soviet lenses we've ever used. In fact, these are almost all the most popular Soviet lenses. So today you can learn something for yourself, and if necessary, avoid buying something you don't really need. Kola, what do you think about this?
I think this is very nice, powerful idea, wonderful theme.
I'd also like to make a quick disclaimer. We are missing several lenses that are quite important to the history of photography. We don't possess most of the wide-angle Soviet lenses. This includes Zodiacs, Zenitars, some wide-angle mirrors and Pellings. Unfortunately, we also don't have Rossars. It's a shame because it's one of the very few lenses that were originally designed entirely in the Soviet Union and had a profound impact on the history of photography worldwide.
But we're doing our best to fix it.
Indeed we are. We also don't have the Jupiter 9 85mm f2.0. I think it's a pretty important lens, many people love it. Finally, we haven't used a couple of Soviet telephoto lenses, but overall, most of the telephoto lenses have already passed through our hands, so I think we can form some kind of opinion on them. So let's start with our first lens. It's the Jupiter-61 135mm f3.5. I've never shot with it. Kola, tell me something about this lens.
This is the indescribable creation of the gloomy genius of Soviet designers. Also, looking ahead, we still have to see the real gloomy genius. A lot of people call it the best of the best among manual portrait lenses. I generally think that it is very close to the truth. I also got it for a pittance.
How much did it cost?
Any of you can buy it for like $40, and in terms of its optical qualities, it's a Soviet Bugatti of what kind of money.
More like Toyota Corolla, right?
Na.
No, so
Yeah, this is a real Bugatti. Toyota Corolla is an Asahi Pentax 135, which I bought at the same time as Jupiter, and I was looking at those two like that. Well, this one is some kind of Soviet socialist metal glass machine which is miraculously working, and the other one is a real Japanese multi-coated optically perfect piece of fine engineering. But when I compared them head-on, I just cried. They both were priced roughly the same, but Pentax surprisingly was worse in everything. It has fewer aperture blades, it's way less sharp, and it has a lot of aberrations. It aberrates a slouching dog. You have to close it down to the pinhole level so that the edges of the frame could mimic the friction of Jupiter's sharpness.
So optically it's an S tier, right?
I can assure you.
Good. What other categories do we have?
Its price is definitely in the S tier too. In terms of ease of use, well, it has a preset aperture mechanism. It is not bad, but for me it still causes some discomfort. An automatic aperture is more convenient in my opinion, and well, it doesn't have multi-coatings, also it behaves decently in the backlit situations. Believe it or not, there is a multi-coated version out there.
Oh, really?
But it's quite expensive and quite hard to find.
135mm is also a really cool focal length, which allows you to shoot not only portraits but also some kind of wider shots. Overall, I think it's really great. This was all shot on film, so the focus is sometimes off, but overall we see the typical sonar bokeh, which is soft and pleasant. Oh, and by the way, Jupiter 37 is occasionally used by budget astrophotographers. They mount it on tiny cheap mounts and generally with some degree of success. Although it has a bit too much chromatic aberrations for astrophotography, so you should only use it in that way if you are really broke.
If this is not an S tier, then I do not know what needs to be done to earn an S tier.
Okay, we are confidently putting Jupiter 37A in the S tier. I agree. Our second lens is legendary, drumroll please, the Helios 42 lens. This is probably the most famous Russian lens in the world. Oddly enough, I want to put the 44-2 in the B tier, and now I will explain why. Please don't throw feces at me. Firstly, of all the Soviet lenses that I have, unfortunately, the Helios 44-2 has the worst contrast. Soviet coatings are simply bad, this is a well-known fact. And that's why this lens veils and also blooms a lot. And some people love that. I love old glass too, otherwise I wouldn't have like 20 Soviet lenses, but I specifically don't like blooming. On the other hand, I think I took all of my best photos with the Helios 44-2. It was my first lens. Let me show you a portrait here, which I simply adore. Even here you can see the slight background blooming, which is blowing out the hair. I've shot with the lens up close, with extension tubes, and captured some super contrasty scenes with that filter. Here is one of my best shots, I think, ever. I found this trilobite in Paleontological Museum and also shot it with the Helios. Overall, the lens is good in every optical aspect except for the contrast. It's quite sharp, wide open it's sharp in the middle, very soft at the edges, but why look at the edges at wide apertures, right? It is super sharp across the entire frame somewhere around f5.6, and at f4 it is acceptably sharp across the entire frame also. The second reason I'd put it in the B category is the aperture preset ring. It's the same thing Koda was talking about. Even among mechanisms of this type, it stands out for its unintuitiveness. The numbers here are a little mix-up. If you understand how it works, it's incredibly easy, enjoyable and frankly more convenient than automatic aperture in some ways. But I know at least 2 amateur photographers who looked at this and said, screw it, I'll always shoot wide open because I don't understand how this works. So at least 2 people in this world are using the Helios incorrectly. So unfortunately, I have to downgrade the Helios 44-2 to B tier, despite the fact that it's magnificent and many people love it. The next lens is familiar to both Koda and me, and it's a lens for medium format cameras, B and V mounts. The lens is Volna, by the way, I don't remember the nomenclature. Volna 9?
Volna 3.
Volna 3 80mm f2.8. What do you think of this lens?
So, this was a kit lens for most Soviet medium format cameras, and it is very good. It was made to replace Vega, former generation of kit medium format lenses, and I think this was one of the best decisions from Soviet engineers.
I want to interrupt you here. I've been immersed in the lore of the Vega and Volna lenses for the last couple of days, and people online seem to have a very strong opinions of which of them is better. I looked at photos from both. Honestly, judging from what I saw, they make practically identical images. I believe that if you see a significant differences between Vega and Volna and prefer one over the other, then you are not a photographer. You're a believer, or a preacher, or a collector, but you are definitely not a photographer. Because if you shoot actual photos, you couldn't care less. That's just my personal opinion.
Objection! My take on those lenses was mostly about ergonomic issues.
Oh, the ergonomics are different here, right?
I got this wonderful camera with both lenses actually. I held them both in my hands, I attached them to the camera, I poked them, and it seemed to me that Volna's design is much more human. Much more.
Interesting. Very interesting. I haven't thought about it. But from an optical standpoint, honestly, I don't think the difference is that huge. I know Volna gets a lot of hate for its bokeh. Some Russian photographers simply despise it. Honestly, I think its bokeh is pretty normal. It swirls a bit, but not too distracting. Yes, it is sharp. Let me show it. You see, the bokeh balls have a slight peculiar edges, but I think if that bothers you, you don't know how to shoot. Just shoot a different background, so you'll get a pleasant soft bokeh, no problem. For example, here. Is the bokeh sharp here? I don't think so. Everything is super soft and pleasant. And this, by the way, was shot wide open. So, as you can see, the sharpness at f2.8 is phenomenal. Overall, the lens produces a completely sharp image across the entire frame, wide open. Here too, I don't think that this bokeh is too sharp in any way.
Well, I just wanted to tell you about my sister's wonderful cat, Ублюдок. I shot it recently with the aperture fully open at a very long shutter speed and without a trigger cable. And also I was shooting with a key of 60, which slams its mirror so hard it makes the dishes in my grandmother's cabinets shake. And my grandmother lives 2 hours away by a car from here. And this photo came out so sharp that when I was printing it through an optical enlarger, I could see my kitchen reflected in the cat's eye. That's it.
Unfortunately, you can't see it here because it's a low-res scan, but we believe Kola. You can even see a little bit of it here, even Kola's own reflection. By the way, it also has a very small minimum focus distance, so you can shoot macro with this lens even without extension tubes. This is also very nice and very rare for medium format cameras. Accordingly, you can see the depth of field here at the minimum focusing distance. It is very shallow, of course, because it's a medium format. Volna has two problems. First one is optical. Volna, like most Soviet lenses, unfortunately is prone to blooming. And this portrait shows it. The lens absolutely doesn't handle backlight scenes. Look, there are tons of great sharp photos made with Volna. And here is my portrait. By the way, the bokeh here is truly ultra sharp, with heavy edges. Some people might not like this, but I think it looks pretty cool.
Well, I think it's completely unfair to mock this lens for a sharp bokeh when we have Helios 44M in the same list, which often gives such a sharp bokeh that on digital cameras focus peaking often catches the bokeh balls as an object in focus.
Yeah. There is also this absolutely incredible photograph made by Kola where Volna produced the softest bokeh in human history. The blur is incredible, with absolute sharpness on the eyelashes and pupils. I really like this photograph. The color rendering is fantastic, everything is superb. But unfortunately, its coatings don't fight against backlight, even the soft fill light from the clouds. That's the first thing. Secondly, there is another problem. During the production of Volna, they used a lubricant which was very volatile, and absolutely all the Volnas that have survived to this day have stuck apertures. That's because the lubricant evaporated and then settled on the aperture blades.
But this also applies to Vega?
Yes, Vega has that problem too. I think it's quite significant. I mean, I'd suggest putting Volna at A tier, but you're welcome to disagree.
Well, in my opinion, it's still better to compare medium format lenses with other medium format ones, and well, beggars can't be choosers.
Let's clarify this for our viewers. In Soviet times, two medium format cameras were mostly produced with two different bayonet mounts, the B and V one. There also was the C mount, but this was a long time ago. Unfortunately, very few lenses were produced for either mounts, both in the Soviet Union and in the Western countries.
I think that when literally every camera comes with such a high quality glass, we'll place it to the S tier.
Accepted. Yeah, it should be clarified that Volna lens is currently cheaper than Helios's in the Russian used market. That means it's super easy to find and also super cheap. Therefore, we're placing it in the S tier.
Well, it's worth mentioning that this lens also can be easily adapted for the full frame, for the 135 film, and you'll have a great sharp and bright portrait lens.
I know that many people actually use these cameras on full frame and even on APS-C cameras, and basically everyone is happy with them. Our next lens is... Damn, that's a bit of a bummer. All the best lenses are in the beginning of the video, but the next lens... I also think it's definitely one of the best Soviet lenses ever produced. It's the Jupiter 21M 200mm f4. And it's a wonderful sonar designed telephoto lens with 4 elements in 3 groups. What can you say about the Jupiter 21M, Kola?
Well, I can tell you another story. It's like Jupiter 37 and Takumar one. I once found an amazing Pentagon F4 200 millimeters. It was in a mint condition, not used at all, straight from the factory. And at the same time, at a flea market, I saw a ruined Jupiter 21M, which was definitely used to hammer nails in the past and not very recent. And it costed so low, almost cheaper than the cheese quarter pounder in our local Вкусная точка. As much as I would like to sing the praises to the Pentagon, it is wonderfully assembled and finished. When I compared the photos from my bright and shiny German quality glass and what has been remained from this lens, which
has gone through apocalypse, right?
Exactly. And I cried again that Jupiter is actually so much better. I couldn't believe it and keep rechecking the results over and over again.
The Jupiter 21M is the sharpest Soviet lens, period. There is no Soviet lens which is sharper, at least at 35mm, than the Jupiter 21M. And I'll show it to you right now. From wide open, both in the center of the frame and at the edges, it's absolutely sharp. This is the only lens that can not only compete with modern lenses in terms of optical quality, but also can even beat them. The only minor bad thing this lens has is, of course, some chromatic aberrations. All vintage telephoto lenses have some chromatic aberrations. This is due to the complexities of designing long-focus optical systems. Different colors focus in different places due to the very shallow depth of field of these optical systems. You can see that there are chromatic aberrations, and unfortunately it doesn't completely disappear when stopping down. So here is my Jupiter at f8, and you can see that the sharpness is exactly the same in every part of the frame. Chromatic aberrations went away a bit, but some remained. And it stayed this way all the way up to f22. Thus this lens isn't really suitable for astrophotography. But who cares? The Jupiter 21M is simply incredible. I took my best photos with it. I'm absolutely convinced of that. These include mountain landscapes and all sort of abstract subjects like this little window or this temple. It's also very well assembled. My lens, which didn't survive the Afghan war, conversely, is in a good condition, is simply perfect from a mechanical standpoint. Everything clicks as it should and the focus works just as it should. We give the Jupiter 21M a big thumbs up. I think unanimously, right?
Sure.
We move it up to the S tier and to the very top of the S tier.
It's also important to mention that even though it exhibits some chromatic aberrations, all its competitors, which are vintage telephoto lenses, behave much worse.
Yeah, that's true.
And also my Jupiter, which has survived the Afghanian war, it's fully functional despite its terrifying appearance. This is a Kalashnikov assault rifle from the lens world, S tier.
S tier. Guys, I forgot to mention another very important thing about the Jupiter 21M. It actually has a drawback, and a rather serious one, but it can be fixed with literally 2 minutes of work and the craftsmanship of a 5-year-old. The Jupiter 21M lens has a special pad inside the lens, which covers the automatic aperture mechanism. It is very large and very silvery. It reflects a lot of light, and you'll occasionally get a big flare in the center of the frame, completely random, unrelated to the lighting. You can't predict it or prevent it. Fortunately, you can simply cut out a piece of black velvet paper and glue it to this pad, and everything will be just fine, and the lens contrast will be greatly improved. The next lens is the one which was gifted to me by Kola.
Hold on, there's one photo I shot on it.
Kola also took one photo with it, yes, that's true. And this lens is the Helios 103 53mm 1.8. Honestly, it's an amazing lens. I really like it. Let me show you photos right away so I don't make any unfounded claims. Compared with the other 50mm Helios lenses, it's exceptionally sharp. I shot with it on a long trip and the results were simply super sharp and super good. I think it was one of the best films I've ever shot. So yes, I only shot one film with the Helios 103, but I shot it for like 6 months, almost. Everything was shot at f4 and f5.6, and at f4 everything is absolutely sharp right up to the very edge. Unfortunately, I didn't have time to shoot very much wide open. This photo was taken at 1.8, and you can see that the bokeh here is super soft. There is no blooming, no glooming, no grooming, and nothing else. It also has, for once, excellent coatings. It has a distinctive blue tint. The only downside to this lens that I can think of it isn't really related to lens itself, but rather to the Contax Kiev system itself. Lenses of the system don't have their own focusing mechanism. Focusing is handled by the camera body. But because of this, you can't change the aperture properly. As soon as you start changing the aperture, the lens rotates, throwing off your focus. You have to hold the lens with one hand and twist the aperture. From the one side, it is not very convenient. From the other side, it's rangefinder after all. You're not looking directly through the lens anyway, so you can set the aperture first and then worry about focus. Mechanically, the lens is also perfect. I'd recommend it for Kiev and pre-war Contax cameras any day. Just please don't convert it to modern mirrorless. It ruins the lens. And this lens, it really needs to be used with film. It's already become a part of a history. They sometimes come up really cheap here. You can find such lens for as low as 25 bucks. Plus, at f1.8, it's one of the brightest Soviet lenses ever produced. Overall, I think it's also a super S-tier lens. But next up, we have a lens that I've never used, but frankly really wanted to use. Kolya, tell me something about the Zenitar-M 1.7 50mm.
I was eager to use it for a very long time either, and I also have heard a lot of good things about it. But when I finally got it and started comparing it to my old rusty Helios, I was terribly disappointed. Zenitar was a little less sharp, and in terms of colors, it was substantially inferior.
Wow, that's interesting.
It looks like a golden fucked up piece-colored filter, and it really upset me. Later I decided to give it a few more chances on film, and it did perform much better there, so I'll drop some of the charges against it.
Is it possible to shoot with Zenitar at open aperture of 1.7?
Is it possible to do it with Helios?
I think it's difficult and only possible in rare situations. Primarily while shooting portraits, where the face is in the center of the frame. You can't shoot anything else at f2.
In this case maybe you could, but that doesn't mean you should. In terms of the weighted sum of its characteristics, it does not significantly exceed Helios anywhere, but it is inferior in many places. At the same time, it costs 2 to 3 times more, and it's also harder to find. I would say it's not worth the money.
Yeah, it's 2 times more expensive.
It was this lens that taught me one simple truth. When you buy Soviet optics, you don't have to look at reviews and tests on the internet at all, because the quality of such a lens primarily depends on the degree of alcohol intoxication of a particular shift at the manufacturing plant. Everything else is not really of much importance.
I'll add to Kolya's point of view from, so to speak, a historical perspective. It is common on the Russian side of the internet to adore Zenitar. In the post-Soviet space, it is considered one of the best, if not the best, Soviet 50mm lens. When we were approached this lens, we thought it would simply blow our minds away. Something absolutely incredible. And yet, it turns out it's simply not much better than the Helios. I know for a fact that its resolving power is nominally better than that of a Helios at all apertures, but in real life, it is not really particularly noticeable. It produces less swirly background also. In other words, it has less character.
No, I'm absolutely sure that my version is some kind of a hellspawn. It shouldn't be like this. There are definitely better copies, since they are so adored. Not every copy is like that. Therefore, I would honestly put my own sample on the C tier.
C tier.
However, I believe that the people's love for this lens does not deserve a C tier. So let it still be B.
Tier B. Done. The next lens is Zenitar M2S. It's the last of the Mohicans, because it's effectively the last Soviet lens. It wasn't made in the USSR. It was produced in the country which is called Russia in the early 2000s. But I think it's fair to classify it as Soviet, since its optical design is directly borrowed from its predecessor, Soviet Zenitar-M. I think they have the same optical design, with only the coatings being improved. It was the last budget lens which was created still with film cameras in mind. After that, KMZ rebranded and started making completely different things. And I have a lot to say about this lens. Let's start with the positives. The image is excellent. This is the only Soviet lens I've used in paid work. I used it on a B-cam while recording a public talk, and it gave me an excellent image. This lens has a superb rendering. I think this one was shot at f2.8. Everything is very clear and at the same time soft and pleasant. We also shot a short low-budget film with it. And I'll show you some shots from that film, which, in my opinion, also look pretty good. So, it's optically quite good. It's a bit soft wide open, the contrast is incredible, the best contrast of all Soviet lenses, because coatings were no longer Soviet, but Russian modern ones. But the lens has several major problems. Firstly, there is a huge air bubble right in the middle of the lens. That means that quality control in the 2000s was simply appalling, significantly worse than in Soviet times. This bubble doesn't affect the image much, but honestly, it's still a real shame. From a mechanical standpoint, this is the worst lens you can imagine. Soviet lenses are usually mechanically good, but this one is just awful. It's impossible to focus properly. The lens block scrapes really hard against the lens barrel. And sometimes, to focus on a certain point, you have to jump over the focus and then back the focus again, otherwise it just won't work. So you can only shoot stills with this lens and nothing else. You can take it apart either. Because if you take it apart, you won't be able to put it back together, as it is made of the cheapest plastic possible. By the way, this cheap plastic fantastic one is very cool from a design standpoint. I really like this lens visually. It's very cool from design standpoint. It is almost toy-like, but produces a good image. Everything else, on the other hand, tells me that this lens should be in the C category. It also has an automatic aperture mechanism, but there is no way to turn it off, so you cannot use it on film cameras without this jumping aperture mechanism. Zenitar-M 2S also has an excellent minimum focus distance of 30 cm, which allows the photographer to shoot macro at the scale of 1:2 without extension tubes. By the way, I think this is a very rare lens abroad, so you most likely won't find it in a good condition anyway. We're both familiar with the next lens. It's of course the Maksutov ZM5A 500mm f8 mirror reflex lens. We could talk about this lens for an eternity. I already reviewed it. It was viewed by 300 people, that's a lot in today's world, of course. I'll tell you straight away that I really like this lens. It is considered the sharpest mirror reflex lens in the history of amateur optics. What is your opinion on the ZM5A?
Well, this was the first Soviet-era vintage lens that I bought for myself. It also was the first manual lens that I bought for myself. And it was the first mirror reflex lens that I bought for myself. And it was the first telephoto lens that I bought for myself.
Oh, you're a pervert. So your virginity loss happened in a very sudden way, just right away and in the wrong hole.
Sure, just like in my childhood.
Yeah, everything's just like in childhood.
It feels the same as when you learning to ride a bike for the first time. First sex, first bike ride, you're yelling and crying, and your father is holding you by the shoulders. That's it, spot on.
But for some reason, it's a lot of fun.
From that moment on, I realized that I found my thing, that I needed to buy up all those Soviet lenses one by one just to feel again what the M had given me.
You know, mirror reflex lenses aren't for everyone. You'd have to be a pervert to shoot with them. We are, so we love it. This lens has enough resolution for everything. All these photos I'm showing you right now are almost unprocessed. There is not even any contrast correction in this photo. It's just a JPEG straight out of camera. That said, I think this lens unfortunately has one design flaw that cannot be explained by the Maksutov system. That blue flare at the edge of the frame is caused by the lens's light shield not being long enough. Maxitov lenses have two mirrors and also a couple more corrector lenses. And that flare is light, which hits the sensor directly from the first corrector plate, so it shouldn't be here. It is present in my photo, and it actually is present in Kolya's photos too. Kolya, by the way, used this lens in his reportage, and generally speaking, on a sunny day, it works okay.
Yes, it does. Quite well.
Here, in this shot, you can also see this little blue thing in the corner. And that's a flaw of the Soviet engineering. That said, in all other respects, I think this lens is simply superb. It truly gives you pure joy. It's just fun. It's awesome to have. People say that 500mm f8 lenses like this are very difficult to shoot handheld, but as an experiment, I even shot some video footages with it. With in-body stabilization, of course. Yes, it lasts for 3 seconds, but you understand, right? Generally speaking, if you're lucky, you can even shoot video handheld. But that's too much of a circus, of course. You shouldn't do that all the time.
Look, it's actually quite suitable for a photo report. I had no problems with that, and there were no problems with it on the crop sensor either. I can also add quickly that, firstly, Donut Bokeh is just an amazing experience that everyone needs to try. Secondly, I can't help but praise his casing. The M5A case is some kind of aesthetic and user experience sugar coma. I've dragged it everywhere. It has gone through hiking, rafting, water tourism, everywhere. It is very beautifully crafted and strong. It has endured everything.
Yeah, it's sturdy and cool looking. Wait, we are really placing it into the S tier again?
Yeah, definitely, why not?
Horrible, frankly horrible. Let's move it to S tier. I don't think it should be on the very top of the S tier, because the mirror reflex systems are, after all, quite an acquired taste. We move to our mastodons. This is the Helios 44M, almost same as the Helios 44-2, but not the Helios 44-2. And you know what I'll say? Let's put it in the S tier right away, and then we'll explain why.
Yeah, sure.
The Helios 44M is the same as the Helios 44-2, only better in every single way. It has better coatings, excellent colors, and it is also very user-friendly. It has a fantastic automatic aperture that can be easily switched off. It also has a wide range of aperture settings for fine-tuning. It produces a stunning image. If you like swirls, you can use it. If you don't like swirls, simply choose more natural backgrounds and you'll still get a super natural bokeh. I think the Helios 44M is the perfect lens. And this is the only lens of all of them that I can honestly recommend even for reportages. I shot reportages with the Helios 44M in dark places under very challenging lighting conditions, and I absolutely loved it. It also handles macro well, just look at it.
This, as far as I remember, was shot pretty close to its MFD.
Of course, it has a 55 cm minimal focus distance. It is not outstanding, but it is not terrible either. It is average for a 50mm lens. It also doesn't bloom.
All my photos shown here haven't gone through any processing, it's pure lab scan.
This apparently was shot wide open. And here are my photos taken with a digital camera. And we see that at aperture close to wide open, the sharpness is more than adequate. Honestly, judging by the photos, I would never have realized it was shot with a vintage lens. Even if you want a modern picture, the Helios can do that. It's super versatile. It is a one-size-fits-all solution, and I really like these photos. If you want to swirl the background, just add some flashlights in the background and everything works perfectly. I also adore the flares of the Helios 44M. They are very artistic. I've taken a lot of reportage photos with flares. This is among my favorites. Everything sings in a sea of flares. The flares are very diverse. Here we got some astigmatic kind of flares, but it all looks incredible. You can play with it endlessly. What do you think about this, Kolya?
It's a real workhorse and absolute must-have, and also worth every penny, yes.
I think all the other lenses in the series, like 44-M4, M6, M7 and M5, will produce roughly the same image and will be similarly built. And probably the M7 will be even better. You can use them for literally everything.
There are very small differences between them.
Yeah.
Yes. There are, of course, individual admirers, usually of a senior age, who record 4-hour videos on the topic of how 44.3 differs from 44.4. When I bought myself a Pentax Spotmatic body without a lens, I shot with Helios exclusively for a very long time, and I made a lot of amazing shots. And when I finally upgraded to Takumar f1.4, I confess, apart from the lens speed, I haven't noticed any significant improvements.
This Helios works well even in macro. I once used Helios for macro in paid work, because I didn't have extension tubes for the Sony camera I had at the time, but I did have extension tubes for M42 mount. So I was choosing from several vintage lenses I had. I needed to photograph 5cm paper cubes that had been painted and then reprinted, which were then reprinted on meter-long boards. And the resolution was such that the typographic screen was clearly visible in the photos. In other words, more sharpness was not needed. You see, Helios is simply perfect in every way. We are moving on to the next, much more controversial lens. This is the Mir 1B. 37mm f2.8, the only wide angle in our selection. God, I have so much to say about it. Let's start with the positives. It looks cool. Even awesome, it really is. It also is perfect mechanically. Everything turns and clicks absolutely perfectly. It also produces wonderful flares. They look like they've been photoshopped. There are many of them, there are different colors and sizes. Personally, I like them. And now the rest. Optically speaking, this is the worst lens I own. At f2.8, wide open, it is unusable, both on film and digital. The aberrations are off the charts. The minimal focus distance is also very long. It stands at 0.7 meters. So it's impossible to take close-up portraits with lots of blur, despite acceptably large aperture. Closer to minimal focus distance, the image also turns everything into a complete mesh. Spherical aberrations are outrageous. At f4 at infinity, it is generally usable on film. At f5.6, it is generally usable at infinity even on digital. The actual workable apertures are f5.6, f8 and f11. That's it. It's also impossible to use at f16 as the contrast and resolution drop dramatically. This is our Mir at f2.8. The image is simply nuts. It's impossible to look at. Aberrations are very noticeable not only in tests, but also in real life. And the image is blurry. Then, at f8, everything is sharp and beautiful. And I apparently didn't add f16 here. Well, no big deal. I'm just saying that stopping down the aperture leads to a sharp drop in contrast. The lens veils terribly. It has terrible coatings. We also used it in a short film. I'll show you a couple frames now. Here I think everything was shot at f4, and even then you can clearly see that the lens is soft. The out-of-focus areas due to aberrations are also very unpleasant. Overall, it turns out very sad. I don't know whether it is visible here or not, but the blooming on the Mir 1B also has an ugly blue tint. I do not know why it happens. It is very difficult to remove it in the post-processing. This shot, because of that, didn't fit together well with the other shots, because all the other shots were taken with a Zenitar and a Jupiter. It is generally fine on film. I'll show you one of my favorite shots. You can see that everything is sharp, everything is beautiful and moody. This one was shot, I think, at f4. At infinity it's still not bad. This one too, I think it was shot at f4. It was already late, the moon was out. But it is clearly not extraordinarily sharp. There is also a ton of vignette at open aperture, at 2.8. Okay, optics are bad, got it, let's move on. The ergonomics are also bad, because it has a really large, nice and comfortable aperture ring, and a really small focus ring, which is also too close to the camera body. So you are always messing the aperture instead of focusing, and it's incredibly annoying. Actually, it has two large aperture wheels. One presets aperture, another actually sets it. They work flawlessly, but they're too big and you constantly miss the mark. And the third terrible ergonomic thing is, for some reason, the front lens element unscrews easily. And once we're filming a short film, our camera operator, who was at the time new and didn't really know much about lenses, she started unscrewing the lens from the camera just to replace it, and instead of the lens, she unscrewed the front element. And she was so scared, because the lens was mine, and she thought she completely ruined it. It seems to me that this is the only lens that, unfortunately, deserves to be firmly in the D range. The front element is also very large because it's a wide-angle lens and you can accidentally smudge it when unscrewing it. This is potentially very dangerous for the shooting process. I must have gotten a bad copy again, because I saw photos of people online and they shoot with it wide open. I've seen that it's possible, but everyone says that it's soft. But not as bad as mine. This means you could also get a bad copy. My lens was in perfect condition. It has clearly never been used before me. It was sitting just in the factory case, and it is so bad. I'll show you the next lens. It sits just near me. I call it Big Bertha. You could also call it Dora or Behemoth, or as you like. Yeah, this lens is the world-famous Tier-3S photo sniper, which appeared in the Soviet cartoon Prostokvashina and was widely known in the countries of the socialist bloc. It's 300mm f4.5, not a telephoto, but so-called normal lens design, so it's absolutely enormous. I bought it only recently. I shot 2 rolls of film and a couple of sets on a digital camera with it. On the one hand, it is simply cool. It is a lens designed to be used with a gun mechanism. There should be a trigger. Unfortunately, I don't have one. You press it, it closes the aperture and activates the shutter. So it's basically a gun and was designed to resemble and imitate a gun. The image quality is generally good. That is, I think the lens is a bit soft at f4, and it does have some chromatic aberrations at f4, but that's normal for long focus vintage lenses. It already looks good at f5.6 and you can use it normally at f5.6 at any distances. It is worth noting that this lens performs worse at its minimal focusing distance, so if you want to shoot portraits at 300mm, I don't know why, but still, it is still better to choose, for example, Jupiter 21 for that. At infinity, this lens performs very well from wide open, with only some slight chromatic aberrations. So, it's not ideal for astrophotography either, but what can you do? Here I'm showing you 2 film shots, one of them was taken at f4. The skyscrapers are sharp, but chromatic aberrations are visible in the foreground. And here, at f5.6, the buildings are just as sharp. Honestly, I hardly notice any difference at all. But leaves in the foreground look much better structured. This is digital, so you see that the lens isn't too soft. This was also shot at f5.6. I have no major complaints about the optics. The contrast is fine, a little low, but that's again normal for these types of systems. The focusing ring is super convenient. Honestly, I think modern lens manufacturers should use focusing systems like this. It is really very convenient, even if you are shooting without shotgun adapter. Another plus is the cool optical design. Tier is one of the very few optical designs that was designed specifically in the Soviet Union and not stolen from the Germans. The lens has only 3 elements, and the lens maximizes them. It works superbly, and the sharpness is also great. What are the downsides of the lens? The aperture mechanism itself is a nightmare to use. It is not intuitive. You need to consult the manual before doing that. Firstly, you wind it up like a spring, then you change the aperture. For example, I have it at f8 and now I'll set it to f22. And then you press the thing that clicks loudly and obnoxiously. This clicks also shakes the camera very violently, and I can't imagine how the photo sniper would be actually used for wildlife photography, because it's so loud that any moose or hippopotamus would hear this click from 50 meters away and run from you into the forest. Secondly, you can set intermediate values. That is, there are only f4, f5.6 and f8. This isn't really good for astrophotography, because at f5.6 it still has too much aberrations, and at f8 it will be way too dark. Perhaps for such cases it makes sense to buy the earlier version of the Tire, the Tire 3A, as it has intermediate stops. It is also important to know that there are many Tire 3s. There is Tire 3S, there is Tire 3A, which is optically completely identical to the one reviewed. There is also the Tire 33, which bears almost the same optical design with just one additional lens, and it's compatible with medium format. It also bears the same specifications, 300mm f4.5. There is also identical Tire 33, which is a large format lens, and it covers formats up to 5x7 and has exactly the same specifications. In other words, they're essentially the same lens. It was designed by brilliant Soviet engineer Volosov, one of the most prolific optical engineers of the Soviet Union. And it's the same design for all formats, and it works perfectly. I think it's very cool. But based on all the characteristics, I'd put it in the A tier. It's not Jupiter, after all.
Isn't it a bit too high for this lens?
I think it's absolutely deserved. The main objective problem I see in this is the aperture control mechanism. By the way, another unexpected advantage. This lens is so heavy that you can shoot it at longer shutter speeds. You can shoot handheld at, let's say, 100ths or even 1/60ths of a second without a stabilizer. And you'll get relatively sharp photos. The next lens is also mine, it's the Industar-62. I prepare a whole monologue about it. If you're watching this video, you know about this lens. It is almost as famous as the Helios 44-2. f3.5, it's quite dark for a 50mm lens. There are some specialized macro lenses which are darker, but this lens doesn't have any outstanding macro characteristics. It is dark, it vignettes very strongly wide open, it is relatively sharp but not outstandingly sharp. Just okay in terms of sharpness. It doesn't swirl the background as much as Helios lenses, it swirls slightly, but it also doesn't have any exceptionally pronounced bokeh characteristics. It is mechanically weak, it is a little glitchy when you focus it. Not nearly as much as the Zenitar-M2S, but not perfect either. It is not very good ergonomically, because when you change the aperture, you change it on the front of the lens. It is very inconvenient, you have to look at the front of the camera while shooting. The aperture settings also aren't usually visible from the above, so you have to twist the camera, completely throwing off your focus. You also cannot use it with polarizing filters because of this. It is ergonomically poor. Minimal focus distance is 65 centimeters, which is not bad, but not really outstanding. And everything what I said, unfortunately, prevents me from ranking it in the C tier. So I'll put it in the A tier. I fucking love this lens. It is simply gorgeous. That is the problem actually. On paper, it is not impressive at all. But at the same time, it's so much fun to shoot with it. It's so small. Huge Zenit camera fits in a jacket pocket with this lens. And I think the photos I took with the Industar-52 are some of my best ever. It just happened that way for some reason. This was taken with the Industar-52. It's good for landscape photography, it's super sharp, it's good for portrait photography at open aperture. I think it's super expressive, sharp where you need it and soft where you don't. It also renders colors really well. This was taken on a dark, cloudy evening. On the other hand, you can get a more vintage image, like I did in this photo. More film-like, and a slight blur of a busy background. I really love it. Unfortunately, I haven't shot much with it yet, I only bought it this spring. I also really like this photo, I think it's really cool. Or this one, just simply from the overall experience, it's very fun to shoot with it.
I was someone who spent a long time trying to dissuade Vlad from buying this lens, and when he bought it and started telling those stories, I was like, damn, why didn't I buy it for myself?
It is also the cheapest lens of all those featured here.
About $6, you said?
Yeah, probably something like that. Maybe I got the more expensive copy, but it definitely cost less than $10. The next lens we have in the line is also relatively popular. Of course not as popular as the Helios or Industar-52, but still. It's the Industar-61 L 50mm 2.8. It's sitting right next to me now. Who'll start, you or me? Look, mechanically this lens is truly excellent. The aperture preset mechanism is very well implemented. It has a very good minimum focus distance of 0.3 meters, which also allows you to shoot macro shots closer to 1:2 ratio without micro rings. So from the mechanical standpoint, there are no complaints. It also basically has a built-in lens hood, as you see.
I agree that its MFD is wonderful and it could shoot great macro shots maybe. However, I would argue with everything else.
I don't agree with it actually. I think it's bad for macro. Okay, go ahead.
No. I mean, at least the mechanical capabilities for macro photography are nice.
Yeah, of course.
But I would not call the aperture preset mechanism convenient at all, because compared to Jupiter 37, well, I don't know really why. It's much more convenient to preset an aperture on Jupiter. It took me a long time to get used to this Industar, and I would say that it's disgusting for enormouses.
Listen, honestly, I got used to it really quickly. I actually thought it would be awkward, but after shooting for like half an hour, everything just clicked automatically. But probably that's because I used it after using the Helios 44-2, which preset aperture mechanism is more complex. Image quality of the Industar-61 is actually debatable. We argued about it. I thought it was sharp, but Kolya thought it wasn't.
Because I shot it wide open a lot.
I think the truth is somewhere in the middle. It's not super sharp wide open, but overall it's about the same as the Helios at f2.8. At least judging by my charts and tests.
It may be true on the paper, but intuitively, when you shoot with it, there are serious problems with focus and sharpness.
Yes. The problem is that everyone's gotten used to the idea that Industars, which are all Tesla designs, should theoretically be the sharpest of all Soviet designs. But in fact, this is not the case. They're certainly a little sharper than Helioses, which are all biotars, but only so slightly. And for some reason, it is subjectively difficult to focus on the Industar-61 LZ. Here I'm showing Kolya's shots, by the way. Everything is sharp here.
That's because I took this shot with a digital camera.
I also see that the aperture is closed down.
Moreover, I was focusing from live view in 10 times magnification. This is the only option to get into focus on it.
But here the aperture is wide open and there is a slight focus issue I see.
This was shot on the 10x2.
I discovered this too. It's really true. I don't know why. That said, if you close the lens slightly and shoot distant subjects, not close-up portraits, the sharpness is great. I have no objective complaints. But subjectively, there are some difficulties with this lens. I agree. On the other hand, Kolya took this wonderful shot, very unoffensive ring by the way. The bokeh is soft and the focus is perfect, but that won't always be the case. It's perfectly focused here too, but that won't always be the case. Look, I'm also going to complain about macro a bit. All the Russia believes that Industar-61 LZ is a wonderful macro lens. It still gets marketed as such. I don't know why. In my experience, out of all M42 lenses, the Industar-61 performs the worst with extension tubes. It has terribly annoying chromatic aberrations. At closest distances, the light just starts to focus in the wrong places. You can see it here if you zoom in really close. There are also very strong afocal chromatic aberrations. Behind the focus, color shifts to blue, it's slightly visible here, and in front of the focus, it shifts to red. This is very pronounced, and in macro, it's critical and incredibly annoying. If you want to get this lens, it's fine, it's really fine. There is also Volna 9 lens, which has an identical body, and it actually shoots macro well. The Industar is simply a different lens, it's designed for another use.
You forgot to mention the bokeh.
Yeah. The bokeh here is an acquired taste. I realized I'm a pervert, so I like it.
This is purely a matter of taste. I wanted to try it, I tried, I was disappointed. I realized that I'm an absolute hater of a star-shaped bokeh.
I, on the other hand, couldn't care less. I was confident it wouldn't affect my photos at all. And then I found myself sitting at like 1 AM with extension tubes, just trying to capture as many stars as possible. I love it, unironically. If you want to experiment with aperture shapes, this is the lens for you. Because the shape changes at every stop of an aperture. If you can find this lens for like $5, go for it. But I don't see the point in buying it separately if you already have, let's say, a Helios. Honestly, I'd put it in the B tier, as the lens doesn't seem to have any serious issues either. I would put it in B, that's right.
Listen, all the time you were talking about it, I was mentally preparing to argue with foam at the mouth that this couldn't possibly be an A tier. There's no way. But you like this is B, okay, nice. And now I'm even feel disappointed that we didn't argue really a lot about it.
Yeah, no arguing here. Oh well, our next lens might be more controversial. It's Industar-61 110mm f3.5, which covers largest medium format, a 6x9 frame. Kola, you're currently having an affair with my Moskva 5, so can you tell us right away what do you think of this lens and this wonderful camera?
It's an ironically amazing thing. I didn't expect anything from it at first. When I read a little about it, watched some
And
videos,
everyone is hating it on the internet.
I look at how Vlad treats it, what kind of things he does with it, and I just started crying again. I searched flea markets to find my version, as for now, to no avail. I started begging Vlad to bring this Moskva 5 to me for a while, and Vlad did it. And he also left it with me for the whole
Like a year.
more like 6 months, and I'm just thrilled. I'm still looking for my own Moskva for this lens, and the 6x9 format with this lens, the way it renders. Oh,
Just look at these details, it's brutal. I zoom in by like 500% and you still can see a figure in the window like 10 kilometers away from a shooting point. Of course, primarily it's probably due to the format, not for the lens, but still.
if you take enough pills.
Yeah, in this case you can see everything you want. I'll continue my apologetics of this lens. Surprisingly, a lens made in the 1950s handles backlight much better than most Soviet lenses. It doesn't veil or bloom. I don't know about flare because I don't shoot against the light with such cameras, it makes no sense, but the colors are rendered incredibly. Look at this drum scan from a Vision 3 500T film. It's simply incredible. Yes, this lens is objectively not perfect. Here's my grandmother's portraits. I love her very much. This one is a little more wicked because it's so contrasty, but in my opinion also very fun. This lens has one major problem and one minor one. It has a very long minimal focusing distance of 1.5 meters. That means it's impossible to take portraits with it. Of course, this is more due to the limitations of the camera's rangefinder, but whatever. Forget about close-up portraits. And the second problem, there is astigmatism at the very edges of the frame which doesn't go away when stopping down. Let me find an example. See, right? Everything turns into perpendicular lines. But honestly, it's 6x9. Crop out the edges of the frame and keep using it. Who cares? It's like 5% of the frame on one side and 5% on the other.
Yeah, you can open the frame with the catamaran where there are some light leaks right in the middle of the frame, and I could just cropped it out and got an absolutely adequate reportage frame that I'm not ashamed to post anywhere. It's fantastic.
It's important to note that after the Moscow 5 cameras stopped being produced, the same leftover glass was converted into a small format SLR lens and sold for M39 cameras. And that lens is considered weak on full frame. So everything we've just said applies only to Moscow 5 camera. We don't have a small format lens, but we heard it's weak in both contrast and resolution. But objectively, we haven't really tested it. So, back to our horses. I suggest we'd put it in the A tier. What do you think?
Well, from the very beginning I was thinking between A and B, but now I look at level B and realize that a goose ain't no friend for a pig.
Plus, 3.5 aperture is actually quite fast for a 6x9 lens. Great, we've made up our minds. let's move on. The next lens, oh, this will be my monologue again, but not a very long one. This is Industar-61 300mm f4.5. This is a large format lens. In fact, it's an ultra-large format lens because it covers formats up to 24 by 30 centimeters, which is larger than 8 by 10 inches. In terms of sheer numbers, this lens is not just mediocre, it's a complete failure. What kind of resolving power do we usually expect to see in a lens? 50 lines per millimeter is an excellent sharp lens. 40 lines per millimeter is a good lens. 30, okay, that'll do. Do you know how many lines per millimeter this lens renders?
This is a large format, so I'll say 10.
Well, in fact, even large format lenses can easily reach 30, 40 and even 50 millimeters. Rumors of the optical weakness of large format lenses are greatly exaggerated. 5 lines per millimeter. In fact, of course, this is all complete nonsense. After all, this figure was obtained at the edge of the image circle, which is usually not even included in the large format frame. In fact, the lens is relatively sharp. It's one of the very few lenses that I actually can call a true portrait lens. Many people think that portrait lens should be soft. I don't agree. On a full frame or medium format, I like sharper lenses for portraits. But this lens is soft precisely by large format standards. That is, in some photos you simply don't see how they were shot in large format. There is the Cathedral of Christ the Savior, which I shot. It was shot with the large format camera, but you could easily imagine that it was shot on 35mm film, for example. That is, it doesn't really have that large format feeling of cutting edge sharpness. But is everything sharp? Absolutely. It's a poor scan, so you can't see details here, but I'm sure I could see details in the negative. And as a portrait lens, it's simply perfect. A beautiful girl lies in the forest, incredible large format bokeh, everything's very, very sharp. The blurriness of the scan is only due to my poor scanning technique. But I can't set it to level S. It also doesn't have a shutter, and for a large format lens, it's a huge downside, as you'll be having some problems while shooting it at day and with high-speed film. The lens mount is also non-standard for conventional large format cameras. These are all, of course, the cause of the non-standardized large format process, but still I would suggest putting it in tier A. We'll quickly deal with the next lens. This is MS28mm f2.8, which is a lens for panoramic cameras of Horizon series. It is a good lens. This lens is relatively sharp at f2.8 overall. Frankly, this lens is much sharper than the Mir 1B. I like it in every way. The only thing is, on my camera, for some reason, it is not focused on infinity as it should be at all horizons, but somewhere near 3 meters. But that's just my problem. I couldn't find anyone else with the same problem online. I'd place it in a B tier simply because I did have a mechanical problem with it. Also, at the open aperture is not like extra sharp. Yeah, I have a mechanical issue with this lens, but I think you won't really have it. So we'll see that this image is very sharp, despite the fact that main subject is very near. At f16, of course, everything is sharp, absolutely tack sharp. Here is our mutual friend lying on the lawn. And it's sharp, although purely by design it shouldn't be. I even shot nudes with this camera. Incidentally, this photo won a photo contest on the Lomography website. I won a 10% discount on any of their cameras, which of course I didn't use, lol. Let's move on. Next one is Industar-61 28mm f2.8 half format lens, made for Chaika 2 camera. Honestly, I don't have any major optical complaints about it. I think it's a little soft wide open, it's not as sharp as most Industars. But maybe that's because half frame formats are generally less sharp, as the grain is more visible. I'm showing you photos taken with it, and you can see that it's like not super sharp at the edges of the objects. But honestly, I like it. I think it looks quite aesthetically pleasing. This lens does have one operational issue, however. The aperture ring is very tight and it's located on the front of the lens and it's very difficult to move. The lens is detachable, by the way, but there is no camera with the same thread. and focal flange distance, so we can't really swap this lens out for another camera. I think this lens also fits neatly into B tier, because it's good. But I wouldn't adapt it to any camera on its own. And there are some perverts who do it because it covers an APS-C sensor. Don't do that. Please, shoot it the way the manufacturer intended. The next one is Helios 89.
Well, it is very peculiar thing, and man, couldn't you find something better to show?
Yeah, I apologize. Let's show something beautiful. These mountains, for example. This is a very beautiful photo, I like it.
Thank you very much. This is a non-removable half-frame lens of the 5-micron camera. Optically, it pleases me. It's a very cool experience. This was the first Soviet film camera that I bought after switching from point-and-shoot film camera. I wasn't ready for it yet, so I switched to SLR pretty quickly, but later, after growing out some chest hair, I took it from the shelf again, blew off the dust, and I realized that it was amazing.
Funnily, it doesn't actually look like half-frame shot at all. It looks more like a full frame, if not medium format. It's very interesting.
Unfortunately, this lens has its reasons not to get into the steer, dictated not by the glass but by the design of the camera, from which it cannot be removed, for example. And there is no way to turn off the automation and shoot in fully manually. I don't like it, but there is just a weird mode there. You select the aperture and you have a fixed shutter speed of 1/30th of the second.
Overall, I think it produces a very vintage looking image, which can be either good or bad depending on your taste. Core-rings, of course, are not ideal, as I see. Well, this is quite typical for Soviet lenses.
Of course, yes, as far as I know, there is no any multi-coating here, and I would say that it's an A tier because all the complaints that you expressed about your scale cameras, for example, the setting of an exposure pair on the Chaika, all of it have been solved here simply amazingly.
Yeah, you basically don't have to do anything at all.
No, actually, if you were on drugs and wanted to change something, or at least to focus on this camera, you just look down at the lens and use the incredibly ergonomical levers on the rings to set what you need. Everything works and fits exactly where you want it and sets perfectly. And when it's not needed, it slides away perfectly. Just some kind of mechanical orgasm.
Great! We have 3 lenses left, and next one, I'm afraid, will be controversial. This is T22-75mm f4, a medium format lens for Lubitel and Komsomolets lineup. The letter T in Soviet camera nomenclature stands for triplet. This is a very simple lens made from 3 pieces of glass, a cooked triplet, which was developed back in the 19th century. This is literally as cheap and as basic as you can get in the terms of lens design.
Now you decided to open one of my best photos at the moment when I was about to say what I disliked in this lens. You just preemptively throwing out counter-arguments.
Yeah, let the images flow as a counterpoint.
Well, I don't have the most pleasant experiences interacting with the camera what this lens is attached to. Nevertheless, I realized that it's not a problem of the lens. I bought 2 Lubitel cameras for less than $10 each, with leftovers from the purchase of Kiev, which I gave to Vlad. And if you count how much effort I spent on repairing and adjusting those lenses, if I had been a little smarter and done everything right at once, well, for the money it cost, this is very close to the S-tier in fact. And this is the most affordable non-toy medium format available. What can you say?
It is also quite wide for a standard lens. It's slightly wider than 50mm, probably like closer to 40 or even 39mm. Despite its slow f4.5 aperture, it somehow produces excellent and pronounced bokeh, and its bokeh is pleasant despite it being a Cooke triplet. Triplets are known for their fairly sharp, bubble-like bokeh. Nothing of this sort is noticeable here. The lens also renders colors superbly. This lens, though, has issues similar to the Moscow 5 lens. It slightly blurs the very edges of the frame, even at the smallest apertures. It's hard to see it here, because the scan quality is quite poor, but here you can see by the birch trees that the very edges of the frame are a little blurry. But honestly, at any magnifications in any scenario, I don't think this will be a deal breaker. It is also worth mentioning that it has a fairly large minimal focusing distance. It's like 1 meter, I think.
I could say it's often critical, and it's a shame.
It's often critical, yes. So it's impossible to take close-up portraits with it. I think this was shot on a minimal focus distance, so you won't really get any more blur. Here the blur seems a bit stronger, but the image is cropped a bit. This, I think, was also shot close to a minimal focus distance. So will it be A tier or B tier? I suggest B tier because, well, it's not Volna after all.
Look, I'm suggesting A tier because, well, it's just a medium format camera that costs less than a fucking roll of black and white film that you
For
going to
10
stick
bucks,
inside of it. What else can you find for that kind of money?
Yes, that is true. It is true. The design is simple and cheap, yet the image can be stunning. Go to the lomography website and search for a T22 lens, and you'll see tons of masterpieces. The first page there is full of masterpieces. One of the best lenses on lomography site is T22 triplet. From one triplet to another, it's T43 40mm f4, and this is the default lens for the Smena 8M camera, which is legendary in the former USSR countries. More than 20 million of them were produced. That means it's still the most widely produced camera in human history. Honestly, I like shooting with Smena. This is another situation where a lens isn't very good according to its nominal technical specifications. It is not super sharp, wide open, it is dark. It's impossible to focus well because Smena is a scale focusing camera and also the lenses aren't interchangeable. This means you can't adapt it properly to a digital cameras without breaking a sweat, but it's the same story. You start shooting with it and just... Firstly, it is very beautiful. Secondly, the photos I took with it, honestly, were pretty darn good. And I don't see any serious optical problems here too. Smena 8M was a toy camera that every Soviet schoolboy could afford. You can buy one for $5 now. Despite this, from f5.6 to f16 it can deliver absolute sharpness across the entire frame. I would never have guessed that these photos were taken with $5 camera. Unlike f8 to f11, you'll get absolutely sharp photo, as sharp as you might imagine. I also like how this renders colors, just really good. Look at the tonality, it's stunning. This shot is complete crap, but the rendering is very good. So, honestly, for me, it's a solid A tier. Yeah, I would definitely put it in the A tier. Coatings also work pretty well. Yes, there is an issue with the aperture being set directly in the front of the lens, but it's implemented much better than on the Chaika. Because the lens is fully plastic, everything is a bit smoother and lighter to turn. So for me, honestly, it's a solid A tier. And finally the last lens, and here you take the stage because I've only taken one shot with it, but it was quite an experience. It's a medium format Jupiter 36B 250mm f3.5.
It's just a fantastic thing, there's no need to hide it, it's an A tier without any questions. But the casing for this lens, it's D tier. It has a very uncomfortable light filter compartment, they constantly fall out, they are dirty, dusty, they do not twist properly. In short, this case is just a disgrace to photography. After wonderful casing from the ZM, I can't be silent about it. The lens itself is wonderful. Simply stunning thing. Huge and heavy.
For a medium format 250mm lens, f3.5 is actually insanely fast. Even most full-frame modern lenses don't offer such light gathering capabilities.
Moreover, you wouldn't expect this, but it behaves incredibly well wide open. It's very convenient and also has comfortable controls.
Tell me then, why it's not an S tier?
Well, I lowered it for a poorly adaptable mount, but they are also available in Pentagon 6 mount. So you can raise it back to an S tier. My bet, you can basically adapt it on any system you want.
I don't understand why. They're cheaper than Helios here. They cost like $35.
Because no one is shooting with them. I
Yeah.
also found it for $30 because there are forgotten mounts. Nobody needs them. Let it be, yes, I overreacted.
You know what might be the only problem of this lens? It is really heavy. Shooting with such a telephoto lens on medium format is just plain hard. But it's probably not enough to exclude it from the S tier.
Well, I agree. I don't think it deserves to be removed from the S tier for that. After the M5A, I'm beaten up my life. I know what it's like to drop a lens and break a leg, and not my leg, but the neighbors from below one.
So, here is the list. I think the top 2 spots are absolutely deserved, even among the S tier lenses. Helios 44M and Jupiter 21M are 2 lenses you can confidently buy even for digital photography and even for reportage.
I still don't agree with the fact that Helios 103 is higher than the M5A.
Okay, fine. It's just, it really stunned me, this lens. And the M5A is definitely also not a multi-purpose lens. It's much less versatile than the 50mm one.
But at the same time, it's much easier to use and adapt it to modern cameras.
Yeah, that's true. Honestly, Helios 103 just shocked me. I mean, I didn't expect anything at all. I thought the whole roll would be a failure. Then I look at the results and then I was stunned. Yeah. And the fact that Helios uses an extremely outdated bayonet mount, it's not the Helios' fault, but that of an Arsenal engineers.
Yeah, they like my sister's cat.
In the end, absolutely all of these lenses can be used for shooting. We've even shot a film with this goddamn mirror lens. And you can take good stills with it too. You just need to understand their limitations and not to be disappointed after purchase.
I mean, you can take pictures with all those lenses, but it doesn't mean that you shoot, and it might not be a fun experience.
That's true.
Often the difficulty of getting such lens is absolutely not comparable to its quality characteristics.
Especially in the Western countries, because all these lenses probably cost like 10 times more there. Here you can buy Helios 44-2 for like 30 to 40 bucks, and given their popularity abroad, it probably costs more than $100 there.
Well, I can leave my house, walk 2 blocks down the street and find an art school with a box full of lenses and cameras that they'd be happy to give me for a couple of bucks.
So, literally everyone in Russia shoots with Helios. Amateurs who got an old DSLR from their moms shoot with Helios. Sometimes even professionals shoot with Helios. It's already become a cultural code of a kind.
And what about that Batman movie with Robert Pattinson, which was shot on Helios, and Dune movie, which also was shot on Helios?
I'm actually quite pessimistic about this. They used Helios in like one single shaky shot. They just didn't want to use expensive glass because it was too dangerous, I'm sure. Of course, Helios can be used in film production. Rehouse lenses are now sold for an extraordinary amount of money. By the way, don't buy them. I think this is bad because it ruins all lenses. Very few people actually use these rehouse lenses how it's intended. Everyone buys them just for show. But in reality, it just ruins the lens. Don't buy rehouse lenses unless you're actually going to be shooting something high budget with follow focus. And if you're shooting some high budget stuff with follow focus, you probably can rent a Cook set for a couple of days, so why even bother with rehoused lenses? So, appreciate your Soviet lenses while they're still relatively affordable. We hope you enjoyed this video, and someday we might make another tier list, which will include more wide-angle lenses, other lenses for large format cameras, and well-known lenses we don't yet have, like the Jupiter 9M and others. But that's in the future. Until then, we bid you farewell.